Hi everybody, my name is Monica Krebser and I'm going to be presenting on specific learning disability, or SLD. So a little bit of background on specific learning disability. The term specific learning disability is defined by the Individuals with Disabilities Act as a disorder in one or more of the basic psychological processes involved in understanding or in using language, spoken or written, which disorder may manifest itself in the imperfect ability to listen, think, speak, read, write, spell, or do mathematical calculations. The term specific learning disability includes conditions involving perceptual disabilities, brain injury, minimal brain dysfunction, dyslexia, and developmental aphasia. What this means is that specific learning disability is a process disorder where students are unable to fully reason, spell, read, do math, or listen. The IDEA's definition of specific learning disability has also remained the same since 1976. It is also important to note that specific learning disability does not include learning problems that are the primary result of the following: visual, hearing, or motor disabilities, intellectual disability, serious emotional disability, cultural factors, environment or economic disadvantage, or limited English proficiency. Some of the characteristics of specific learning disability are the following: difficulties processing information, struggles in specific subjects, social skill deficits, or reading below grade level. Some students also experience dyslexia, which is difficulty learning to read or interpret words, letters, and symbols, or dyscalculia, which is difficulty in number-related concepts and functions. It is also important to note that specific learning disability students may not exhibit the same characteristics of one another. Some of the struggles seen within the classroom are the inability to process information, lack of attention, confusion, and the inability to digest information. Student struggles often build on one another. Students' inability to process information causes students to have a hard time focusing and paying attention to lessons. This lack of attention then causes students to be confused and they cannot digest the information that has been learned. So a lot of the students struggle, and it starts with the inability to process information, and then that kind of snowballs, and then they're not interested in attention anymore, and then they're confused because they kind of lose their place. Specific learning disabilities are considered a high incidence disability. According to the U.S. Department of Education, they report over 2.8 million students are currently being served for specific learning disabilities. Of all of the students that are receiving special education services, 47.4% of the students are specific learning disabled. What this means is that more students are classified as specific learning disabled than any other disability. Specific learning disabilities covers the following disabilities: dyscalculia, which affects a student in math interpreting numbers; dyslexia, which would affect the language arts area of student study, and that affects how students interpret words and letters; dysgraphia, which affects a student's handwriting ability and their fine motor function, as well as spacing in regards to writing; nonverbal learning disabilities. In this disability, students often have higher verbal skills but weaker motor skills, as well as visual, spatial, and social skills. So what this means is that students will often have trouble interpreting nonverbal cues such as facial expressions, as well as body language. Auditory processing disorder and visual perceptual and visual motor deficits will be explained later on in the presentation. Some strategies that are implemented, teachers are really encouraged to make general classroom modifications for their students who are diagnosed with specific learning disability. And some of these modifications include assistive technology such as books on tape, text to speech, calculators, and word overlays. All of these assistive technologies have to be approved for the specific class. So it's not always going to help in each class, such as a calculator. It's not going to be of any use in an English class, and a book on tape might not be as effective in a math class. So something teachers can do would be teacher implemented strategies, and that would be something simple such as breaking down large tasks into smaller tasks so students are able to focus on one task at a time and complete each task before moving on or getting confused. And giving students notes before class. By giving the students notes before class, they're able to see what they're going to be learning, get a little bit of background information, and hopefully understand a little bit more before they're in the class so they're able to comprehend a little bit easier. As I mentioned before, it's important to note that each strategy is not always appropriate for each subject that a student will have. Auditory processing disorder is also one of the specific learning disabilities that is covered. This disorder involves the way students recognize and interpret words and sounds. The ratio of males to females with auditory processing disorder is 2-1, so it is a little bit more commonly found in males, but nothing drastic. Some of the signs of auditory processing disorder include mispronouncing and misspelling similar sounding words, such as celery and salary, or three and free. Distracted background noises. Students will be distracted easily by sounds in the background. They really need a quiet environment in order to learn best and not be distracted. Difficulty recalling a verbal lecture or a presentation. So if lessons are mostly done by speaking and there's no manipulatives, no hands-on, no visuals, students will really have trouble comprehending lessons that way, and trouble expressing their thoughts and feelings clearly. So some strategies that can be implemented in students with auditory processing disorder would be showing students rather than explaining to them. So by being able to show students what they're expected to do, expected to learn, they're able to visually see it and understand it a little more than if somebody is just speaking words at them because they're unable to process all of those words. Another idea would be to have students verbalize concepts and vocabulary back to you to make sure that students are understanding what's being taught and what's being told to them. Using visual cues, handouts, and manipulatives, that's something that's very effective. Students are able to manipulate things with their hands. They're able to really look at things and see how lessons are being taught and how things work, so they're able to understand much better and to reword confusing directions. So always checking to understand that your students who have auditory processing disorder are able to comprehend what you're asking of them. Because if students are given a set of directions and they don't understand the first direction, the odds are that they are not going to be able to make it all the way through the lesson or the project or the activity because they didn't understand the first direction. Visual perceptual deficit is also covered under specific learning disability. This disorder affects how students copy and see things. Some of the symptoms would include students who cannot copy accurately. Students also lose place frequently when they are reading. They will turn their heads when they are reading a page or hold papers at odd angles that other students might not normally. And they also tend to misalign letters, irregularly space their words and letters, and have somewhat messier papers than those of their peers. So some of these strategies that you can employ here would be to provide tracking tools for reading. Do not grade your students for neatness, provide alternatives for written assignments, and use large print textbooks if those are available to you. visual perceptual deficits often occur, you'll see them in language arts classes or English classes, spelling, whereas they're not so much seen in math, only because there's not as much reading, but you can see the copying errors and somewhat of the reading of the paper in odd ways. So just to recap a little bit on specific learning disability, it is the highest disability diagnosed amongst students today. It is equal across the board in regards to race, gender, and socioeconomic status. Specific learning disability is often subject related, so students will struggle in one specific subject area. And classroom teachers are encouraged to make general modifications within their classroom to tend to individual student needs. Thank you so much for watching my presentation.